Good morning. I want to welcome all of you to today's hearing. Our primary objective this morning is to examine the Food and Drug Administration's fiscal year 2020 budget request. Our witness is the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Commissioner, welcome back. I remember well your first appearance before the subcommittee. I think you'd only been in office a few weeks then. And now you appear to be, you're unfortunately appearing before us, which will probably be your last time and with just a few days left in your service at FDA. I think I can speak for many people when I say that you've been a fierce advocate for public health, tackling critical issues such as reducing youth tobacco use, addressing the opioid epidemic, reducing drug prices, and improving generic drugs. You've taken on these issues during a time of sharp partisan divides on many issues, and yet you've earned broad bipartisan support. I congratulate you on that. It's always been a pleasure to have you here, and I wish you the best in your future endeavors. Hope you enjoy spending time with your family back in Connecticut, but your efforts and leadership as Commissioner are greatly appreciated. Prior to your departure, we're going to take one last opportunity to discuss the impacts of your agency's fiscal year 2020 budget request. As in past years, the FDA's request is in stark contrast to much of the federal government. Many administration officials have appeared in the recent weeks defending steep cuts to their budgets. That's not the case here. Your request totals $6.1 billion, an increase of 7% from fiscal 19. The increases include nearly $176 million in budget authority and $241 million in user fees. These additional resources are on top of a significant increase for FY 2019. On the medical product safety side of the agency, you're requesting $254 million more than last year's enacted level, an increase of over 7%. For the food side of the agency, the FDA is requesting almost $56 million more than FY19, which is an increase of 4%. I should also note that you're requesting authority to increase tobacco user fees by $100 million from the e-cigarette industry. Again, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I look forward to today's discussion. My ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry, has been delayed, but I will yield to Mr. Adderholt, the former chairman of the committee, for any comments that he might wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be here. It's good to be the ranking member for a few minutes here while we're waiting on the real ranking member to get here. As you know, I had the privilege to chair this committee for 6 years, and after 6 years, I'm now over at the Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee, but I'm glad to be able to maintain a seat on this subcommittee and to work with everyone that's on this subcommittee, and including the chairman, and he has great work. But Commissioner, welcome. It's good to have you here. I'd like to take a moment to congratulate you on your tremendous productive tenure at the Food and Drug Administration. I've enjoyed working with you to address a number of issues that we've worked with us on this subcommittee. And quite honestly, it's really rare in a town that someone is able to accomplish quite as much as you have over the last 2 years. And I believe I speak for many as we appreciate your service to the country, and the fact that you're leaving FDA is in a strong shape speaks well of you as your successor takes over. I applaud the work of the agency that has done over the last few years to bring increased competition to the market in order to lower the drug prices and expand access. I know that this has been a priority for you and the administration, and I look forward to working with your successor in that regard. Also appreciate your leadership to curb the tide of the opioid epidemic. Enforcement measures against companies that are violating the law to helping speed alternative non-opioid-based pain medications through the approval process, to your efforts to reduce misuse and abuse of opioid drugs. The FDA, under your leadership, has been a leading partner in fighting the scourge on many of our communities across the nation, and particularly in my part of the country where the Appalachian Regional Commission, or Appalachian region, has been hit hard. And of course, I say the commission because I just the last couple of weeks had the co-chair of the Appalachian Regional Commission down to my district, and we were able to discuss some ways that we can try to fight and help this scourge that's been on a lot of the states, and particularly the Appalachian region. And finally, I'm encouraged by your work to curb the epidemic of youth e-cigarettes by addressing youth access and youth appeal to these type of products. And so again, we sorry to see you go, but we look forward to seeing you in your next chapter of your life, and I know you will have great success. So again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to following up with you in the future. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing today and having the commissioner here in his last week in office. Thank you.
Mr. Gottlieb, without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record. I'll now recognize you for your statement, and then we will proceed with questions from the subcommittee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your kind comments at the outset. They mean a lot to me and to my colleagues at FDA, and I want to thank you as well, Congressman Adderholt, for the work that we've done together over the last 2 years. And I want to thank all the members of the subcommittee and the chance to appear before you today. As was mentioned, this is the last time I'll appear before the subcommittee as the 23rd commissioner. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to have worked with you and proud of what we accomplished together on behalf of FDA's public health mission. We're especially thankful for the funding increases the subcommittee provided to FDA in 2019. That new funding comes at a critical time. It's going to help FDA modernize our approach to medical product manufacturing and make product review more efficient and safer and help us protect our food supply. The funding requested in the President's 2020 budget will allow FDA to advance our work to ensure the safety of food and medical products that we regulate. Today, I want to focus on one of my priorities, and one of my biggest priorities and my biggest concerns right now is the youth vaping epidemic. This is one of the most significant public health crises facing FDA and also facing our nation, and it's one of the most significant problems that we're trying to address here. To help address that concern, the President's 2020 budget requested $100 million in new tobacco user fees. These new user fees are critical to ensuring that the FDA can continue to fight the youth tobacco epidemic and, at the same time, create a modern regulatory framework for the appropriate oversight of e-cigarettes. It's key that we have the resources to continue standing up a framework to put e-cigarettes through an appropriate series of regulatory gates, and that we aggressively confront kids' use of these products to make sure children don't become addicted to nicotine. Last month, FDA proposed to end our current compliance policy as it relates to flavored electronic nicotine delivery systems products other than tobacco, mint, and menthol-flavored e-cigs. We put all manufacturers and retailers on notice that we expect to see heightened age verification requirements in place for these flavored products sold online and at retail. And if rates of use among kids don't come down, we'll need to take additional steps. Our concern about kids' use of these products isn't just based on the potential for kids to become addicted to nicotine from the e-cigs and then transition to combustible tobacco products. It's also based on the direct risks posed by the e-cigs. While e-cigs could be less harmful than combustible tobacco for currently addicted adult smokers who can fully transition off of cigarettes, they're not safe. For one thing, nicotine is especially problematic because of the impact it can have on a still developing adolescent brain. But there are other risks as well. While we're still learning about the long-term potential benefits and health risks of e-cigs, existing scientific research offers some clear evidence that several of the dangerous chemicals in tobacco smoke are also present in aerosol of some of these products. And we know that this exposure is a major health concern due to the ability of these e-cig particles to penetrate deep into the respiratory system. Some of the toxic chemicals and other substances contained in e-cigs can go deep into the lungs and may pose the risk for disease not usually seen in smokers. This isn't idle speculation. Studies have shown that e-cig vapor contains chemicals that can damage cells and cause illness and aging. Research we've reviewed shows substances found in e-cig vapors can pose a risk for decreased lung development, breathing difficulties, lower defense against bacterial and viral pathogens, and vaping-induced inflammatory reactions. We're especially concerned about evidence from animal studies that vapor and e-cigs can cause changes to tissue in the airways that can induce cancer or be a precursor to cancer. Today, I'm announcing that the FDA has initiated a comprehensive research plan to fully evaluate these risks and will report our results publicly. The FDA Center for Tobacco Products and the Center for Drug Evaluation Research are already leading these research efforts. 4 distinct types of ENDS products are being tested, each with 3 different flavors. We need to fully evaluate the potential risks that we've identified and to inform the public as well as our own regulatory decision-making. We also have other safety concerns about the e-cigs. Today, the FDA is notifying the public of a potential emerging safety issue. We have reports indicating that some people who use e-cigs, especially youth and young adults, are experiencing seizures following their use of e-cigarettes. While seizures or convulsions are a known potential side effect of nicotine poisoning, they're more commonly encountered with intentional or accidental swallowing of nicotine-containing e-liquids. But our review of voluntary adverse event reports for these products submitted to the FDA and to poison control centers has identified 35 reported cases of seizures following use of e-cigs between 2010 and early 2019. We believe this signal warrants further investigation. We want to be clear that we don't know yet if there's a direct relationship between the use of the e-cigs and a risk of seizure. We're sharing this early signal information just as we'd share similar information with other products we regulate. We've identified it as a goal to communicate early about potential safety concerns and to share when a safety signal is under active investigation by the agency. As we work to evaluate these potential risks, we'll remain especially committed to preventing kids from using any tobacco products. Any policy steps to advance innovations that could be alternatives to smoking can't and won't come at the expense of addicting a generation of kids to nicotine through these same products and exposing kids to all of these potential risks. I look forward to answering your questions today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Gottlieb. Let me start the questioning. At our February hearing, you and I discussed the issue of small e-cigarette manufacturers' ability to afford to submit product applications to FDA. In response to my questions, you said, quote, "Our desire to extend the application deadlines on these products and give them until 2022 is to give us the time to put in place the implementing regulations and guidance that would not only provide the rules of the road for how to effectively traverse the application process, but also take into consideration the kinds of challenges that you bring up about how we can build into our regulation and guidance accommodations for small manufacturers." In light of this response, I have to say that I was a bit surprised that you recently decided to shorten the deadline to 2021. I'll tell you that your response was somewhat vague. I think that we need to have a robust market for adult e-cigarette consumers with competition and wide product choice instead of a smaller market controlled by the big companies with fewer choices for adult smokers, higher prices, and probably less innovation. If adult smokers who wish to use e-cigarettes to reduce or to end their use of combustibles cannot find products that they like, they may not make the change, and public health will suffer. In compounding, FDA has requested funds to help small compounders become outsourcing compounders. While this isn't exactly analogous, do you feel like the FDA should request funds specifically to help small manufacturers navigate the FDA regulatory process regarding e-cigarettes?
We would certainly, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We would certainly use the resources from the user fees that we requested towards that purpose. And part of the hope by trying to request funding to create a regulatory paradigm for these e-cigarette products and for all the newly deemed ENDS products is so that we can create a proper regulatory framework that can apply the right regulatory touch, including making accommodations for small manufacturers. I would just point out we shortened the application deadlines for the flavored e-cigarette products as an attempt to reduce the access and appeal of those products to kids, to make sure that we have a proper PMTA process to adequately evaluate the risks of those products, recognizing they're being more widely used by children. It wasn't all of the e-cigarette products that we addressed. But, make no mistake, we still have to put in place all the foundational rules. We've got out the SC rule, the standard equivalent, substantial equivalence rule last week. We should be out with the PMTA ENDS guidance within a couple of weeks. I was hoping to get that out before I left, but it will be coming out. And we will have the PMTA rule and the MRTP rule, 2 other important foundational rules, out before the end of this year. So, we are putting in place the elements of the modern regulatory process for these products. And in the context of doing that policy making, trying to take into consideration exactly what you're bringing to light here. We do not want a process that's only accessible, to 3 large companies.
Thank you, Dr. Gottlieb, and I want to applaud and let you know that I think we all support your efforts to keep e-cigarettes and all tobacco products out of the hands of youth. Let me turn to a more parochial level for the remaining time I have regarding olive oil standards. Georgia's home to several small olive farms that produce small batches of extra virgin olive oil. And unfortunately, there's no single standard of identity in the U.S. for extra virgin olive oil. In the fiscal year 19 Appropriations bill, the committee directed the FDA to establish a separate U.S. standard of identity for different grades of olive oil, including extra virgin olive oil. What progress has FDA made in the development of these separate standards of identity for different grades of olive oil? Studies show that the extra virgin olive oil provides certain health benefits that no other grades of olive oil provide. Do you believe that the U.S. should have one single standard of identity for extra virgin olive oil to ensure that American consumers know exactly what they're paying for when they go to the grocery store?
Well, unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, with apologies, I'm not going to be able to answer the question directly, but I'll certainly get an answer back to you. We have over 300 standards of identity, and we have been fortunate to receive some funding from this committee to undertake a broad process to modernize those standards, including more than 100 that relate to dairy products. And so I will get back to you on a specific question around this specific standard of identity. It's not one that has come across my desk yet, but I will make sure it does before I leave the agency in 3 days.
Thank you, Dr. Chairman and Dr. Gottlieb. Let me just start in and follow up on the first question that the chairman asked about the e-cigarettes. I'm encouraged by your agency's work to curb the epidemic of e-cigarettes that are used by the youth. I will be introducing a bill this week that would, number one, raise the minimum age for tobacco products to 21. Number two, it would require online sellers of vapor products to obtain the name, the birth date, the address of customers, and verify the customer's identity through a third-party database. And it would require an adult to sign for the product on delivery. My question would be to you is, do you think a bill like this is needed to help address the youth nicotine addiction epidemic that we're seeing?
I appreciate the question, Congressman, and I'll just say at the outset, while we take aggressive steps to try to address the youth use of these products, we still believe that these products could offer a viable alternative for currently addicted adult smokers to fully transition off of combustible tobacco onto something that's less harmful, notwithstanding our concerns around the risks associated with these products, and we do believe they have risks. These are not safe products. We also believe they're less harmful than smoking combustible tobacco. That obviously needs to be demonstrated through a proper regulatory process. We plan to put these products through that process, but we still believe in some public health promise of these products for currently addicted adult smokers, which is why we're trying to strike this balance even while we vigorously address the youth use. We do believe that raising, and I believe personally that raising the age to 21 for tobacco products can help address this crisis. A lot of the sales of e-cigarettes that we see to youth are secondary sales of enterprising 18-year-olds going in the store and buying a lot of product and reselling it in a high school. And as far as online sales of these products, one of the things we plan to address with the guidance that we're promulgating is trying to put in place heightened age verification requirements for these products being purchased online. We've seen other products being sold online where there is good age verification, not 100% foolproof, but certainly better than what we have today. You look at things like alcohol sales online, wine sales online. We have adult signature on delivery and other kinds of age verification, and they're more foolproof than what historically has been in place with the cigarette products. Some companies are voluntarily taking those steps now, but we think a more uniform standard could be helpful in trying to address the youth access issue when it comes to these products.
Well, I know when you asked just what you said just now, you've said in the past that you want to preserve access to non-combustible for adult smokers, and lot of the youth access isn't just 14 and 50-year-olds buying illegally. It's these enterprising 18-year-olds that are selling to minors. And increasing the age to 21 will make it harder for this type of activity. As I understand, approximately 80% of high school seniors will turn 18 by the time they graduate. FDA's past data indicates amongst 15 to 17-year-olds, 74% of access to vapor products come from social sources. 57% asked for or someone offered a vapor product, and 17% gave someone money to buy for them. If this bill that I plan to introduce, bipartisan bill, when it is introduced, how quickly do you think we could reverse these current trends that we're seeing?
You know, I hope quickly. I think that the challenge here is going to be that once you have sort of an epidemic like this underway, we're going to continue to see some increases before we start to see decreases. I'm not optimistic that when we have the data from the National Youth Tobacco Survey in 2019, it's going to go down. I think it's going to go up. If it goes up, 30, 40, 50%, we're going to need to be stepping into the market with additional regulation. So my short answer to the question is I don't know. We need to be vigorous here, and if we continue to see these kinds of increases year over year for an additional year, we're going to have to be very direct. And the next place we would look is at the pod-based e-cigarettes as a class, because these are the ones that are being abused by the kids. And at some point there's going to be so much youth use of these products that we're going to have to conclude that there's not enough redeeming public health value in having these products available for currently addicted adult smokers to offset all that youth initiation.
Okay, let me see if I can sneak one more question in. FDA last week released nearly 200 pages of proposed framework for the substantial equivalent process. The documents seek input on how process may apply to handmade premium cigars. As you may know, as with all handmade products, no two are exactly the same. Given that FDA remains in the early stages of addressing this process, would it not be appropriate to delay the implementation of the regulations relative to the narrow premium cigar category until FDA has clear guidance for these small manufacturers on how to keep their products on the market?
Well, as you know, Congressman, we pushed off the application deadlines for the cigars as a category while we issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to collect questions looking at questions specifically related to the premium cigars and whether or not there were different patterns of use associated with those cigars that might inform the agency about how we might regulate these differently. We haven't formed any conclusions. We're still going through comments on that ANPRM, but this is a question that's actively before the agency right now. I would just make note that we did get out the SC rule, which does provide a pathway for these products to come to the market using a predicate. And we've also grandfathered a large number of cigars, well more than 1,000, and that pathway is also available to the premium cigars. And just in conclusion, I'll mention that we provided TA back to your office on the legislation that you talked about at the outset, and look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Chairman Bishop and the ranking member for holding this hearing. It's bittersweet to have our last hearing with Commissioner Gottlieb. Mr. Chair, I do want to just, as an aside, I had no idea that olive oil was produced in Georgia. And there was some, I don't want to rat anyone out, but there was some grumbling next to me about Italian olive oil.
Italian olive oil.
And I really think the only solution here is an olive oil sort of, tasting, because I feel convinced that domestic olive oil and buying American must be a good thing to do. So be interested to learn more about that.
Oh, God.
Sorry, I'm just sorry. But there is actually, olive oil is one of the products with the highest rate of fraud and mislabeling, and so it's an interesting topic in and of itself. But we're here to speak to you, Commissioner Gottlieb, and just thank you so much for your service and dedication. The chair said it very well, but you've really worked on a broad range of issues under the FDA's jurisdiction, and I know all of us have enjoyed working with you, and I have in particular. You've been so responsive, so knowledgeable about so many topics, and been willing to tackle many of the tough issues that come before us just in a straightforward way, and we're going to miss you, and we're grateful that you get some time with your family, and look forward to staying in contact, but thank you so much, really, for all you've done. And in particular, I wanted to thank you for a few announcements that FDA made yesterday. First, FDA is working with USDA and EPA on elevating our country's food waste reduction problem during the month of April. Most people don't know that this is Food Waste Month, but we appreciate that you're helping us to do that. That's the challenges of food waste is something I'm focused on quite a bit, and so I appreciate the joint effort. Second, you announced some updates on finding legal pathways for CBD products, including forming a high-level working group and setting the public meeting for May 31st. So again, thank you for prioritizing this issue, which is causing substantial disruption in the hemp market in Maine and in states across the country, and it would be good to have some of these things resolved. But since I have you here, I'm going to start with a couple of questions. One I wanted to ask you about, I don't think I've discussed with you before, but that's chemicals that are in food contact materials. Public concern about food safety due to chemical substances in our food supply continues to grow, and we are currently dealing with a PFAS contamination crisis, and phthalates are also widely used in U.S. food contact materials like packaging and processing equipment. Does the FDA consider new scientific information once an indirect food additive has been approved? There's some concern that some of these substances in food contact materials were approved years ago and may need to be reassessed. And additionally, does FDA currently coordinate with other federal agencies such as the EPA and the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission on chemicals that are used both as food contact substances and or for other purposes subject to the jurisdiction of these agencies?
We would evaluate, thank you for the question, we would evaluate the food contact materials in the same way we'd evaluate other food additives. So we do a scientific safety assessment of them. If there are historical compounds still in use that you have specific questions about, I'd be happy to take that back and take a look at what the process was that they went through and whether or not there's updated scientific information that we've taken into consideration. On the food waste issue, which you and I have talked about a number of times, I'll just mention that, and we've discussed this. We're going to be sending out letters to the industry to encourage adoption of best if used by nomenclature on the labels. We find if as long as the dating is for quality reasons and not for safety reasons, we find that's the best language to be using to try to discourage food waste.
That's great. And my understanding after researching that quite a bit is that that changing that in a way that would bring some sensibility to what a label means, which are, as you know, arbitrary on most things, would be the greatest return on our investment in reducing food waste. That frankly, people just pick it up, and if the label tells them to throw it away, they throw it away, even if it may be just a little bit old.
Not in my house, but
there you go. See, in most houses, there's an argument, so you clearly have a harmonic household. Let me slip in one other quick question. The FDA's FY20 budget request includes an increase of $16 million above the FY19 level for FSMA implementation to provide inspections through the state cooperative agreement programs. It's my understanding that through cooperative agreements, FDA and most state departments of agriculture will soon begin produce safety rule inspections. FDA has indicated that they will visit farms that are qualified exempt under the produce safety rule, but it's my understanding that states will have discretion in whether to conduct on-farm inspections of qualified exempt farms. Is the FDA planning to show up at farms that are exempt from most parts of the rule? Will it vary from state to state as to whether qualified exempt farms will receive on-farm inspections?
Well, I mean, in that kind of a framework, we would defer to the states unless we had a cause to be on the farm. I mean, there might be situations where we would, but we're trying to work in a cooperative fashion with the states and leverage their resources. So this is $16.5 million. It's $11.7 million in new money on top of 2019. We received some money. We were fortunate to receive money from this committee, about $2 million for this effort. But this would go towards, as you mentioned, the state cooperative agreements, the program. It would also help manufacturing and processing facilities comply with the rule. Right now, there's no resources for those inspections, and so these are important resources for the agency to help advance FSMA, and we're grateful for the support that we've received.
Great. Well, I'm out of time, but I guess just to clarify, I think we do realize you have limited funds available, and there was some concern that the FDA, not the states, would be making visits to qualified exempt farms, and that doesn't seem like the best use of resources. So.
We would agree with that. We're looking wherever we can to leverage the resources of the states.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Gottlieb, welcome back. You were before our committee maybe about a month ago. It might have been the same day that you announced that you were leaving government. Was it something that we said?
Well, might have been a week or two before, but it was not the same day. Okay. But I appreciate the.
Well, thank you for your service, and you've navigated process and possibilities very well, and we're grateful and wish you all the best. You'll be with us for another month or so. Is that right?
Another 3 days.
I see. Well, we better hurry and get these questions in. Can you explain the state of the science regarding genetically engineered animals? And then I'd like your perspective on the state of the ethic debate in that regard. And then explain your proposed regulatory pathway, which I believe you released a statement yesterday in that regard.
Yeah, so I think when you and I spoke about this, we were speaking about gene editing in animals. We see a lot of promise from this technology right now, and there's indications in the literature. There's public disclosures in literature where people are trying to use gene editing, Cas9, zinc finger nucleases, other forms of gene editing to try to edit in modifications that are can be inherited. To try to, for example, guard against certain diseases for where there's no effective vaccines, or engineer other qualities that could make the animals more advantageous for food production uses and more impervious to disease. And so this is a field where there's significant promise. I think there are ethical considerations across the board. I think where the ethical considerations are most acute, frankly, in my estimation and where I've been outspoken, is when we're looking at doing gene editing on germline cells for human reproduction. You've seen NAM and other groups come out and talk about the need for potential moratoriums or registries. My concern is that I can't find a good use case on why you would introduce gene editing in human reproduction, and all the ones that have been brought forward to me as a theoretical basis seem to be things that could be addressed with modalities and through methods that are far less high risk, and I think raise far fewer ethical considerations. And so I think as a society, we need to consider whether or not we just put a moratorium on that kind of scientific inquiry, because I think if we cross boundaries that cause deep concern for a large section of the population, we end up potentially besmirching this technology for all the potential beneficial uses, whether it's in animals or whether it's to help cure inherited disease in pediatric patients through gene editing. So that's where I think the most acute ethical considerations are right now, and I think this issue is very ripe, having seen experimentation done in China that did edit germline cells, edited embryos for trying to introduce a heritable trait with really, I think, no significant enough medical rationale to support the risks that they were taking in that case, and other people proposing other experiments in this regard. The resources that we're requesting would help stand up a comprehensive program inside FDA to consider all of these technologies, particularly on the animal side, where we see a lot of opportunity, not just from biotechnology in the context of animals and the use of these technologies specifically like Cas9, but also continued biotechnology with respect to crops as well. And we think it's time that FDA should have a comprehensive program addressing all these possibilities. We think this could be a significant area of growth for the United States, of new scientific opportunity.
And that's a part of your proposed budget?
That is. There was a request, I believe, for $8.2 million, if I'm remembering correctly, of budget authority, and then a user fee on top of that.
Do you think that the FDA is the proper regulatory authority in this regard, particularly in response to your thoughtful response regarding the ethics? Because I frankly was surprised and pleased by the outcry from the international scientific community about this rogue scientific experiment in China. And I don't know if those persons are now being watched or are part of a database to see what happens to these persons or not, or whether, again, this is just some random thing that a scientist does because he can, untethered to the larger consequences for all of humanity. But this question initially was specifically to animals, but then, of course, there's ethical considerations regarding persons. So will you, as a part of that budgetary proposal, have a very considered structure around the ethical question as well?
Well, I think FDA is absolutely the optimal place to consider this technology with respect to animals for a whole host of reasons, not least of which are the ones that you've brought up here today. I mean, we have a deep experience in the use of this technology across human and animal health. I think if we're going to watch these innovations go forward effectively, we have to instill confidence in them, and FDA is a proper authority to evaluate the safety of these products, and that's our first consideration. I think, frankly, also the ethical questions and the other kinds of broader questions, as societal questions and public health questions, that we have to consider across our portfolio. And FDA, looking at this technology across an entire portfolio, allows us to make the distinctions between doing something in an animal and putting a heritable trait into an animal versus why would you ever consider doing that in a human. And so keeping the technology within the domain of an agency that can make those considerations across a portfolio makes eminent sense for a whole host of reasons, not least of which the ones you brought up.
Thank you very much.
Ms. McCullum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I get into my question, I wanted to share this with the committee because I agree with my colleagues' concern on this. This is from Bloomberg News. China is selling genetically modified mice for as much as $17,000 a pair. Demand for animals that mimic human disease is skyrocketing as President Xi Jinping works to turn the country into a biomedical powerhouse by 2025. So this is something that we need not only to be addressing here in the United States, but something that we need to be addressing with our colleagues and friends of the EU and around. So good morning. Thank you for being here. And I want to go back to one of our first conversations when I asked about cosmetic regulation, or should I say, therefore, the lack of regulations. And I asked you about some of the tools available at the FDA to ensure the safety of the millions of cosmetic products on the market today. And I've been learning a little more, and I want to thank your office and others for helping us with this. Part of the problem is Congress has granted you and the UDFA very little authority to even regulate cosmetics. You don't have the ability to order mandatory recalls. You can't inspect facilities or records. You can do that with other food and drug products, but you can't do that with cosmetics. And cosmetic companies don't have to submit safety data before marketing their product. They're not required to register their facilities with the agency or even comply with basic good manufacturing practices. So even if you did have mandatory recall, cosmetic companies are not required to even report their adverse effects to you. So clearly, I think there needs to be more done. In a 2017 letter from the FDA to Energy and Commerce Chair Frank Pallone, it states that 2.9 million products were imported. Less than 1% were physically inspected. But of the products that were physically inspected, and this is 1%, 15% had adverse findings. In addition, where the U.S. has banned or restricted 11 substances for use in cosmetics, the European Union has banned more than 1,300. And I point these numbers out because it seems like we might not be giving you all the tools in the toolbox you need to do to carry out basic functions that I think the American people assume, even in cosmetics, that you're doing. One of the Office of Congressional Appropriations at the FDA in FY19 was $7.3 million. 27 full-time employees devoted to cosmetics. In 2019, little increase, $8 million, and 31 full-time employees are planned. So I'm glad to see the trending's going upwards, but at the same time, Congress had tried to pass unsuccessfully legislation that would have expanded your authority over the industry. But short of that happening, and that's something I'm going to be working with others on, are there anything that you can point to us in the 2019 budget that you're going to build on to help make it safer for consumers in the role that you're going to have with the extra employees and the extra dollars, so that we know the direction to help, due to lack of regulation, to make you more effective in protecting U.S. consumers?
Well, I appreciate the question, and you and I have had the opportunity to talk about this, and I share your concerns that there's a lot of things that we think we would like to be doing as the industry gets more modern, as more products are on the market, more diversity of products, products with more active ingredients in them, creating more potential opportunities, but also more risks. You know, looking at mandatory recall authority, GMPs, inspection capacity, reporting of adverse events, looking at issues with metals in tattoo inks, for example. We've seen a sharp increase in changing patterns of how people use tattoos. It's another area of regulation where we have some questions and things that we would like to be doing. I think there's nothing specific in the budget to answer your question directly. I hope you don't take that as a reflection of our lack of concern and interest in doing something. What I would say is that if we're unable to try to do something within the cosmetics program itself, my long-term plan, and we've worked this up internally, would be to move the cosmetics program to the drug center, where, you know, more and more of the cosmetics themselves have active ingredients in them, where they could be able to leverage some of the resources that we have in our drug center. I don't want to do that. I'd rather see it reside as it historically has resided within the food center, but if we can't get more resources into that program, one way to try to support it better would be to move it into our Center for Drugs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think some of the heavy metals in that I'm finding in some of the cosmetics, I think most women would be taken back, because it's women who primarily are using these products, but more men are starting to use them too. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing to you and our ranking member. And let me thank you for being here, Dr. Gottlieb. And just want to say I wish you well and good luck in this next chapter of your life. It's been great getting to know you. As you know, I'm going to bring up again my two favorite subjects, Cuba and cannabis. And, you know, when you were here in February, I mentioned that I care very deeply about reducing diabetes, especially in communities of color. 30 million Americans, that's about 9.4% of the United States population, has diabetes. And for African Americans, those numbers are even worse. African Americans are 80% more likely to get diabetes than their white counterparts. And currently, 13% of African Americans, the entire population, has diabetes. And unfortunately, in many of these cases, amputations are prevalent. So it's my understanding that the FDA cannot comment on this possible ongoing approval of a Cuban diabetic drug called Heberpot-P, which helps prevent and treat foot ulcers and also prevents amputations. I have visited, I've seen with members of the American Diabetic Association, members of Congress. It's used in many countries. And so while the drug was signed by the Cuban company, it's called Heber Biotech, and the U.S. company Mercurio Biotech, we still don't know where the FDA is on their approval. And this drug has already been made available in, I believe it's over 20 countries in the world. So what can you tell us about what's going on? Are you familiar with the companies? How do we get an update if, in fact, we can't just ask what the status is? And what's the regulatory framework for dealing with drugs from other countries?
I appreciate the question. I can't comment on a specific sponsor and whether or not that sponsor has filed an investigational new drug application with the agency and is in fact engaging the regulatory process, just because that would constitute commercial confidential information. As much as I'd like to answer your question very directly, I would put the question back to the sponsor, and I'd hope that they'd be responsive to you. I would say, though, just at a broader level, a drug that met the profile of what you're suggesting, and if it showed promise in a early-stage clinical study, that it could achieve the kinds of endpoints that you've suggested here today, that kind of drug would potentially qualify for breakthrough designation with the agency and be something that we would be very interested in. But as far as this specific drug and whether or not they've engaged FDA, that's something a question that the sponsor would have to be willing to answer.
Yeah, I understand they've engaged FDA. It's somewhere in the process. We just don't know where it is. It's been there for a year, 2 years.
Right. I'm not sure what they've said publicly, actually, about their engagement with the FDA and whether or not they have an active IND.
Okay, so we should go back to the sponsor.
And ask them if they have an investigational new drug application on file with the agency, and
they could tell us the status?
They should be able to give you some information about that, and if, you know, that would give you an indication of where they are and what stage of development they're in.
Okay.
We could help guide you on the questions to ask them.
Okay, no, I'd like to do that, because this is taking much too long. Absolutely. And we need this. You announced steps yesterday that the FDA is advancing our CBD regulatory pathways for lawful marketing of cannabis derived products. Since the public hearing, I guess, on May 31st, an interagency working group is going to explore dietary supplements and conventional foods containing CBD and public website updates. It's a good first step, especially considering we just passed into law the Farm Bill, which has hemp now as a descheduled Schedule I controlled substance. So I'm concerned about the proper interagency communications with this working group, and I wanted to find out, who do you plan to include in the public hearings, and are you working with an intergovernmental body to make sure that nothing drops through the cracks and that our regulations are consistent, and you're collaborating with Congress? Right,
I appreciate the question. We have engaged with DEA and USDA around some of these questions. I think a lot of them fall within the purview of the agency. You know, we've heard Congress loud and clear that there was an intent to provide a regulatory pathway that allowed for the lawful marketing of products derived from hemp, including CBD. But that bill also preserved FDA's drug authorities, and so what we need to do is craft a framework that allows CBD to be put lawfully into food products, even though it's a drug product and didn't previously exist in the food supply. So that's the conundrum here, because it never previously existed in the food supply, and it is subject to substantial clinical investigation and also approved as a drug. We would have to create a separate regulatory scheme in order to allow this to be put lawfully in the food supply. We don't have a really modern proxy for where this has happened. That doesn't mean we can't create such a framework. But part of what we're going to do, and this is a working group being chaired by Amy Abernathy, who's here with me today, the Principal Deputy Commissioner at the FDA and a physician, part of what we're going to do is also look at potential legislative remedies where you could potentially have, for example, I don't want to speculate too much, but you could have situations where CBD exists in lower concentrations as a food additive and in a more purified, high concentration form as an approved drug. I'll just say, CBD is not entirely safe. We've studied CBD in the context of some of the drug applications, and there are side effects associated with it. And so when you think of the cumulative effects of having CBD for breakfast and lunch and dinner in different food products, you might be getting a dose that could potentially cause public health concerns, safety concerns, including liver damage.
Thank you very much.
We've been joined by the distinguished gentlelady from New York, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and she has an extremely busy schedule, so I ask my colleagues to please indulge me as I recognize her out of turn, but of course in turn as our distinguished chairwoman. Ms. Lowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, but we have several hearings going on at the same time. I want to welcome you, and I also want to wish you well, and I won't say I told you so. But we've had a discussion about what's going on with these kids and the fact that 60% of the kids are vaping today, and now it's going down to junior highs and elementary school. But any event, we've had many conversations about this. Last month, you described a difficult meeting with Altria, suggesting the tobacco giant went back on its earlier promise to withdraw pod-based products from the market, all while moving forward on a $12.8 billion investment in Juul. Boy, I saw that in the newspaper, and I was pretty upset. Valued at 35% stake in the e-cigarette maker. I was so alarmed by this sale. I'm not sure that I was surprised, but I was alarmed. Do you believe that Juul and Altria are working in good faith to reduce youth use of e-cigarettes? By the way, you look at the local newspapers, huge advertise for Juul in the bottom. This could be dangerous to kids, or I don't know if it's that the exact word. Why would Altria publicly say it is so concerned about youth use of e-cigarettes that it would offer to voluntarily remove flavored products from the market pending FDA review, and then shortly thereafter make this investment in Juul? And what can we do about this?
Well, Mrs. Chairman, you did warn me, and sadly you were right about the epidemic that ensued with respect to these products and kids. You know, you ask about can we rely on their good faith? I'm not dependent upon their good faith. That's why we have a regulatory system in place, and that's why we've been taking regulatory action. I'll take voluntary action where I can get it, and if these companies want to voluntarily comply with our rules and take other steps to try to thwart this epidemic, I welcome that, but we're not dependent upon that. In answer to your question, I can't answer your question. I invited Altria and Jewel in to answer that specific question, and I can't say that I walked away from my meeting with them with clear insight into why they would send me a 15-page letter saying that they believe that the pod-based products are so concerning with respect to, you know, stoking this youth epidemic, and the flavored products in particular are so problematic that they're going to voluntarily withdraw their entire portfolio from the market, pending either a successful PMTA application or otherwise the abatement of the youth addiction crisis, and then, you know, several months later make an investment to expand market access to the flavored pod-based product that happens to be, you know, the top-selling product with adolescents. And so those two don't seem to square with me. I thought maybe they would come in and tell me they thought the youth crisis had abated and met one of their criteria in a letter, but, you know, clearly they're not going to be able to say that. So I'm not sure what their rationale was from a public health standpoint.
Let me just ask you, because time is limited, we've had many ongoing conversations, and I appreciate your concern, and I wish you good luck in your future. What kind of advice do you have for your successor? Do you have any recommendations or cautionary tales, particularly regarding tobacco regulation and enforcement? Are you free to really share with us? What do you think? Never mind could have. What can be done now to possibly prevent this spread? It's just widespread, as you know, everywhere.
I appreciate the question. I've had a lot of advice for him. I have to temper some of my advice for him because I want him to show up for work on Monday. But you know, I think a lot of this is going to depend on what we see with the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey, which we're doing in the field right now. We'll have the results probably late July or early August, given the fact that we'll probably try to take an early look at them. I think the policy that we announced several weeks ago that we will fully implement shortly to try to put in place significantly heightened age verification requirements for the flavored products and the pod-based products at retail settings is going to impact this. But unfortunately, our regulatory action in the setting of any epidemic, and this is the lesson we learned from the opioid crisis, you know, you're always sort of one step behind a burgeoning epidemic, and that's why we're trying to act so aggressively to get in front of this one.
33 seconds. One thing that you would like him to do.
So if the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey shows another substantial increase, I think we need to look at the potential market withdrawal of the pod-based products as a category, because those are the products that are being abused by the kids, and particularly the flavored products. That's what we're going to have to start to look at, the cartridge-based, pod-based products. If we see another 30, 40, 50% increase, and we see youth tobacco use rates of this country hit 40 to 45%, which is where we'll be if the increase in e-cigarettes continues to go up. And I'll just add, we're not going to see an increase in e-cigarette use among kids without also starting to see a corresponding increase in cigarette use among kids. So all the dramatic gains that we've made in recent years from a public health standpoint, abating smoking among kids will have been reversed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I wish you good luck, and I just hope as you leave, based upon, we all have could've, should've, would've, I do hope you leave a very clear directive and perhaps encourage us to work with the FDA in place, putting in place some really stringent actions. So thank you very much and good luck, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your patience. Mr. Muller now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner Gottlieb, thanks for being with us, and thank you for your service and all you've done at FDA and the work you've done to advance the mission and protect public health. Really have appreciated the time I've had to get to know you briefly and just see your passion for your work. So thank you for being here today. I wanted to follow up with you on some of the testimony you've had about fiscal year 2020 budget requests, where you've requested an additional $55 million to support FDA's efforts in addressing the ongoing opioid crisis. And I understand you're focusing on 4 priorities: decreasing exposure, preventing new addiction, supporting the treatment of those with opioid use disorder, fostering the development of novel pain treatment therapies, and increasing enforcement and assessing benefit risk. I wonder if you could comment on what the FDA is doing to expedite the approval of non-addictive opioid alternative treatments.
So thank you for the question. We've stated that we're going to withdraw the existing guidances that we have in place as it relates to laying out a regulatory pathway for the development of drugs, particularly to treat chronic pain, acute and chronic pain, but particularly acute pain, and be replacing those with new guidances that are indication specific. So, outlining a regulatory pathway for pain related to, minor post-surgical procedures, or pain related to dental pain, or bunionectomy, or other sort of common places where you see analgesics prescribed, trying to allow for sponsors to come to the market with more targeted studies rather than having to do 5 or 6 studies across multiple indications. We think this will create a more efficient pathway for the development of non-opioid alternatives for the treatment of pain. So these guidances are going to start to roll out. We have one specifically addressing evidentiary standards for non-opioid alternatives. So this is sort of a modernization of the overall framework as it relates to the development of these products. And I will just say in closing, we've also said that we've been very clear that a product that could potentially treat pain without all of the addictive qualities of opioids would probably be a product that would qualify for breakthrough designation and all the benefits of all the expedited processes that Congress has legislated over the past several years.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other lesser-known programs or initiatives within the FDA that maybe that you haven't highlighted in the budget that you're believing that this subcommittee should further investigate to address the opioid crisis?
Well, I think one of the things that is sort of embedded in the budget is continued efforts to try to address rationalize the prescribing of opioids. I believe that the agency, and we've sort of taken on a view over the last couple of years, that we play a significant role in trying to reduce the rate of new addiction by trying to rationalize prescribing, making sure fewer prescriptions are written. They're only written for appropriate circumstances. When they are written, it's for a duration of use that comports with the clinical reasons why the prescription was given in the first place. So a lot of the resources that we got last year are going towards developing evidentiary standards, evidence-based guidelines that could potentially be used by physicians and maybe even eventually be incorporated into drug labeling to try to better delineate what the appropriate dispensing of prescribing should be by indication. Because when we look at our data, if you look at post-surgical procedures, cholecystectomy, things like that, typically it's a day or two of prescribing of opioids, and yet you still see doctors prescribing 30 pills in those situations. And so we want better evidence-based guidelines that could be used to help guide those circumstances. We're also going to be implementing very soon authority that you gave us to acquire the immediately release formulations of the drugs we put in blister packs, so that more doctors will default maybe to a 1-a-day pack of drugs rather than, again, a 30-day tablet fill. So that whole area of activity, I think, continues to be exceedingly important and a place where FDA plays a unique role and perhaps a singular role in trying to address this crisis.
Thank you. Occasionally, I'll meet with people who, in my office, who talk about some of the rare cancers. And I wonder if you're kind of what you could comment on the FDA doing to help develop more therapeutics for those rare cancers, and how the FDA might be able to incentivize or accelerate drug development in these areas.
I think we've had tremendous success in recent years trying to target rare and ultra-rare diseases, and particularly in the oncology setting. More than 40 of the record 59 approvals that we had last year were in oncology, and some in pediatric oncology and other very rare tumor types. The challenge is, in many cases, recruiting enough patients for these trials, and so that's where we look at things like master protocols where you can allow multiple drugs to be tested within the same protocol. We put out guidance to sort of delineate that framework for the development of oncology products, basket trials where you can test multiple indications within the context of a same trial, tissue agnostic approvals where we might approve a drug that's targeting a rare mutation that might be seen in multiple different types of tumors, but rather than approving the drug in tumors in the pancreas and tumors in the liver, we would approve the drug on the basis of the marker that it's trying to address that drives multiple different types of cancer. So all of these innovations in the clinical development process, I think, are having an impact to try to achieve the purpose that you're identifying here, to make it more efficient to develop products for these very rare cancers.
Thank you very much, and again, thank you for your service.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Laura.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to welcome Dr. Gottlieb. Thank you so much for being here today, but really thank you for your service over the last several years. You and I have not seen eye to eye on every issue, but I really do appreciate many of the important initiatives that you have spearheaded, and I hope that moving forward, two things. One, FDA will continue much of the work that you have started, and then for you personally and for your family, that you move on to another productive chapter in your life. So thank you very, very much for going back and forth with us. I just want to mention to my colleague, Mr. Adderholt, who is not here, but the online sales of e-cigarettes, we introduced the Youth Vaping Prevention Act in January 2019, the first section of which deals with online sales and age verification, so we'll communicate that to him. Let me just ask a question with regard to FDA's role in opioid labeling. Your testimony, you described the ongoing crisis of addiction, one of the highest priorities. You're familiar with the 60 Minutes report. Did the FDA ignite the opioid epidemic? 60 Minutes identified a controversial labeling change in 2001 for Purdue Pharma's OxyContin. The approval of OxyContin in 1995 was based on science that showed OxyContin to be safe and effective, underscored only for a, quote, short-term use. 2001, FDA allowed the label to be changed to include terms like, quote, daily, around the clock for an extended period of time, end quote. It later becomes, and this is still true today, as I understand it, that, quote, there is long-term use, which has broadened the drug's use to all chronic pain patients. If this labeling change occurred without a clinical trial to support it, as has been reported, would that be a violation of the law? And just a yes or no answer on this one.
If the labeling change itself would not, what was a violation of the law, and we know that now, was how they marketed off of that label. Mm-hmm. And they've been criminally convicted for it.
But only with a short period of time for a clinical trial, which I believe it was about 2 weeks in time.
The labeling change, I mean, it's hard for me to relitigate the labeling change made many years ago, but I'm familiar with the history. But the labeling change was made with good intention, and it was the language that they used tried to discourage the use of the long-acting formulations when immediate-release formulations could do. So we were seeing doctors using these long-acting formulations for like a post-surgical procedure when you really should be prescribing Vicodin and Percocet for a few days. Mm-hmm. What we couldn't envision was how the company would inappropriately market off of that language.
But with regard, my understanding is that the law says that a drug must have substantial evidence of efficacy, that the drug has the effect it purports to have in the label. I really would love to see, and if you can get to us, with getting us the substantial evidence of efficacy for OxyContin's label of chronic long-term use.
Well, I will tell you we're doing that now. The changes that were made historically were with the best of intentions by the FDA staff, but we are using the authority that Congress has given us under the Support Act to require long-term efficacy studies with chronic administration, and requiring that information, that those studies will be done, that information will be put into the labeling, and we could take additional regulatory action on the basis of what we find. So we are doing that.
Okay, but because, you know, if you look at the label, it shows a single 2-week efficacy study in the 20 milligrams dose. That was it. And we're talking about a drug whose launch and aggressive marketing, honestly, you would acknowledge, we all would acknowledge as the most responsible for igniting the epidemic that we have today. In your opinion, is this 2-week study legally enough to justify long-term chronic use labeling for OxyContin?
Yeah, it's hard for me to sit here and comment today on the historical information that they had at the time. I'm not familiar with all the studies that they were evaluating at that time, what the standard was for the decision. Right. I will tell you, the company was criminally convicted. They marketed inappropriately off of
do that, but I think we have to look at what the labeling change was, just as for future use. Now, this is Dr. Woodcock at the FDA on chronic labeling. She says here, in 2013, and I quote, FDA is not aware of adequate and well-controlled studies of opioid use longer than 12 weeks. Again, the FDA, how does the FDA justify the current labeling for chronic long-term use? Let me just ask this question because my time is, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll get the question to you in the last 3 days of your, of your tenure.
Thanks a lot.
Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Gottlieb, I think you're one of the best FDA commissioners, certainly most knowledgeable, very responsive. So I congratulate you on your tenure and wish you luck going forward. I do want to just follow up on this, the release, I guess, yesterday about CBD and regulation. And I think it takes a necessary first step, but I'm not sure it goes far enough. I mean, you know, you make the statement that you issue multiple warning letters, and I think you have an example of the 3 companies marketing products with egregious and unfounded claims that are aimed at vulnerable populations. What would be a founded claim for CBD, other than for, you know, pediatric seizures?
Well, right now, it's a good question. There's probably no
there is no founded claim.
Because you can't make a structure function claim because it's not a lawfully marketed dietary supplement.
Correct. So my question is, so there are 2 issues. One is well, 3 really, because if you go online, and anybody wants to go online and see, you can buy CBD that's supposed to be pure, that's actually at a price about, my calculation, about 40% of the list price of the FDA-approved drug. It's claimed to be pure, so I'm not sure how the FDA allows an American company to sell, claiming they're selling pure CBD, which is exactly what Epidiolex is. I don't understand why that isn't being stopped, as they're selling a pharmaceutical, okay? Now, then there are nutritional supplements and food supplements. On the food supplement side, I mean, I'm assuming that CBD is not generally recognized as safe. Is that correct?
That's right.
And we went to extraordinary levels with trans fat, for instance, to make sure there was 0 in any food supplement. 0, not like minuscule amounts, because it is naturally occurring, just like CBD is naturally occurring, but 0. Why isn't the FDA going as hard a regulatory pathway? I walked into a store, like a little country store in my district, and find a CBD food display in the store. Now, it didn't say, show us proof that you're 21 or 18 or something. It's like anybody come in and they're buying a food supplement. How is the FDA allowing a food supplement, which is not generally recognized as safe, to be put in food products and not regulated? And then finally, in terms of nutrition supplement, I think, you hit the nail on the head. The bottom line is that we have a regulatory scheme that basically says that, CBD has been regulated by the FDA as a pharmaceutical product. And as you said, there is no grandfathering in for it being a nutritional supplement. So I think the FDA has to come down a little hard on these institutions, on these individuals who are making money, and they make a lot of money in this, selling a product that I think we agree has no founded claim except for pediatric seizures, right, in the FDA's mind. Why is it taking so long? And we're going to, you're going to study it a little bit more. How do you need to study when CBD is being sold as a food additive when it's not generally recognized as safe?
Well, I would just say, Congressman, I appreciate the question. We're not allowing it. We've taken enforcement action. We're taking a risk-based approach where we're going after places where CBD is being marketed in situations where we think the claims are either misleading to the point of encouraging a patient to forego otherwise effective therapy for a medical condition, or being marketed in a formulation and in a dose that's at a level that creates significant safety concerns. We expressed concern yesterday, I did, about CVS and Walgreens stepping into this market. So you now see big box stores seeking to market CBD products for some uses where the claims seem to be, potentially over-the-line claims for the treatment of pain, for example. So we're not allowing this. What's happening is we see a burgeoning market, and we can't boil the ocean, so we're trying to take a risk-based approach to our enforcement like we do in all matters, and we're hoping by taking selective enforcement actions, you're going to see voluntary compliance from the legitimate manufacturers and retailers because they are marketing an unlawful product. Now, that said, I recognize Congress wants there to be a pathway here, so we're trying to work at the same time expeditiously to create a viable pathway that could differentiate between potentially appropriate use of the product, if we can have scientific evidence to support its appropriate use, and use of the product that creates safety risks for consumers.
Sure. So again, and I see your actions basically looked at a therapeutic claim, but as a food supplement, I don't see any action at all. I mean, I'm going to walk into that store 2 weeks from now, it's still going to have a food supplement, CBD food supplement, foods that have it as a supplement. And I wish you would take action. I don't think you have to take much action before everybody gets the message you shouldn't be doing this. Just one final question. I know that there was a controversy about the FDA using fetal tissue in research, and I understand the contract has been canceled. Has the research been stopped, or is it just the contract just been reissued with another entity?
I don't believe there's any ongoing research right now with fetal tissue at the FDA. That's right, yeah.
So when that contract was canceled, and it's
that
just
contract was canceled.
Okay.
There's no ongoing research.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Mr. Polkane.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Gottlieb. I want to associate myself with the first 10 seconds of my colleagues' remarks on the other side. I don't know if you disassociate with the other 450, but I do think you have been an excellent FDA commissioner. You've improved morale. I mentioned that last time in the department, one of the few where I've seen that happen with a change of administration. The companies that work at the FDA have, in my district, have had nothing but praise for working with you and your staff. I've always appreciated your candor when we agree, and even when we don't. In fact, even more when we don't agree, because I've learned a lot in our conversations. And what I would like to do almost is more of the exit interview, because I do hate to see you leave the position. Independently, in your opinion alone, when you look at the FDA, and I also really appreciate the 3 generic equivalent goal of the FDA, and I hope that continues under the FDA, what would you like to see done differently, and you would hope that if you had that ability, that magic wand, whether it be you need additional funds in some area that the White House and Congress never look at, you're doing something that's idiotic and you think is a waste of your agency's time and takes you off course. I've always appreciated your candor. I hope you'll give some candor here, but what would you do, as you're leaving, what would you say would improve the FDA based on your experience?
Well, I think I appreciate the question, and I haven't quite left yet, so I probably have to temper it a little bit.
You don't have to, really.
I still have residual concerns about the have and have-nots in the agency, and I've always had those concerns, having been around the FDA now for almost 15 years. And particularly on the food side of our house, we have struggled to fully fund our obligations and have adequate authorities. And so I would be taking a hard look at what we do with respect to cosmetics, dietary supplements, and the resources that we have to carry out our food safety mission. Those are the higher risk parts of the agency, the places where you can wake up one morning and find out that something really bad's happened and a lot of people have been hurt. And so I think that we need to be looking hard at that and how we shore up those parts of FDA.
And what are you doing that you wish you didn't have to do? You look back and you're going, I don't think this serves a public mission, and those resources could be allocated towards what you just brought up.
That's a good question. In all candor, I'd have to give that more thought, because I think everything that hits my desk and everything that I've been involved in, I think is really important. The agency has a very vital mission.
Ms. Pingree just said maybe congressional hearings. You'd like to cut back.
I've always looked
at that. And just to this point, and I really appreciate when you said it last time, because the price of generic, when you got that third equivalent, really brings it down. What else could the FDA be doing, again, if you were just in charge to help bring down the cost of prescription drugs? It's something we all say we want to do, but you don't see the activity. I think the American people aren't seeing the activity. I think that was a good suggestion that you had. What else should the FDA be doing, or could it do with or without additional resources to help work towards this?
Well, there's still a lot of areas where we don't see all the expected product competition after exclusivities have lapsed on branded drugs. And the one place is looking at the complex formulations, the complex drugs, where sometimes it's, from a scientific standpoint, hard to develop generic copies of those drugs and demonstrate that they're safe through a conventional regulatory process. I mean, you could contemplate changes to the Hatch-Waxman construct that allow the agency to look at small complements of clinical data in the context of an approval of a complex drug. You'd have to go through the difficult job of defining what a complex drug is. I can define what I know it is. It's sometimes hard to define what you know it isn't. And I'm growing increasingly concerned about the lack of timely second-to-market competition for novel drugs. And we see more and more drugs that are approved for these very rare disorders where once the drug's approved and the population that has the disease is treated, the financial incentive to approve a second drug for the treatment of the same condition has gone down significantly, and the market is so small it might not support second-to-market innovation. And we literally see companies slowing down the development of products if they think they're going to be second to market. That's going to be a problem when you get into things like gene therapy. If the market is only big enough to sustain one product, then you get monopoly pricing in perpetuity and no competition, and it forestalls access. And so that's a concern of mine. I think there's things we can do to make the development of second-to-market innovation more efficient. It's been a focus of mine.
I have 27 seconds, and we have the head of NATO coming in. But I really do want to say thank you. The companies, and I have so many that are spinoffs from our University of Wisconsin that work with you, have had nothing but praise. We appreciate that. We look forward to the department continuing. And, I think maybe it's a bad luck when you're like my favorite Trump appointee. The next one may go down as well. But thank you for your service. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Congressman. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Cuellar.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Commissioner, I really appreciate the service that you provided to our country and give you Godspeed at your next endeavor. Again, thank you so much. I want to follow up on what we talked about last time you were here, and I want to talk about compounding. The center, you're looking at establishing, you have plans to establish a compounding center of excellence to provide training on manufacturing practices as well as establishing investigators for inspectional activities. And my two questions is, can you explain how this compounding center for excellence will help decrease costs for those in need of compound medication? And number two is, how is the FDA taking small pharmacists' issues with regulations regarding distribution and dispensing of medications into consideration? And I want to thank you for doing this. I really, really want to, because I've been to different parts of the country, and this issue is something that we certainly have to look at. So I want to thank you for your leadership on this.
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate them very much. The $12 million that we received in 2019 to establish this compounding center for excellence is focused exactly on some of the challenges that you've identified. How do we help small pharmacies get into a regulatory framework where they can engage in a wider scale of activity, particularly some manufacturing, engaging in potentially office stock, shipping to hospitals. And so what we want to do is make it easier and less expensive for the 503A pharmacies to become 503B pharmacies, outsourcing facilities. And what we believe is by developing a center that can work more directly with pharmacies, help train them on how to meet GMP requirements, provide a higher level of touch, train them on how to be inspected. We believe we can help actually provide sort of almost consultative type services to these pharmacies to try to get them over that transition, and also promulgate policies and guidance that adjusts the amount of regulation that we're going to impose based on the size of the pharmacy and what they're doing. So take a much more risk-based approach. So if a 503A pharmacy wants to compound relatively lower risk products and do it on a small local scale, we shouldn't be applying the same level of regulation as someone who's going to ship hundreds of thousands of vials of a sterile product nationally, because that's more risk. And so the resources are going to allow us to develop a center that's going to be focused on that and help develop this domestic industry. I believe, and I still believe, that if we can get more 503A pharmacies to less expensively convert to 503B pharmacies, we also offer them a tremendous economic opportunity to expand their businesses, because if they remain a 503A pharmacy, they're always going to be capped in terms of what they can do. If they become a 503B pharmacy, a much broader range of opportunity becomes accessible. Those resources are different than what we requested in 2020. We're asking for $13.5 million. That's to help expand the 503B opportunity set, to finalize the bulks compounding list and develop guidance and regulation that's going to further clarify how the 503B pharmacies can operate in a regulatory compliant fashion. This is a relatively new industry, and we envision that this should be a robust industry, but we want to be more actively engaged in making that come to fruition.
Thank you. I do want to say thank you so much for forward thinking on this. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Cuellar, for that last questions. You saved me from having to explore that. Dr. Gottlieb, I want to take a moment to discuss the future of FDA and where you'd like to see it in the next 5 years. As you know, too often a regulatory agency is forced to spend most of its time responding to various issues that arise, and sometimes without any warning, rather than to help build a foundation for the technological innovations that would drive the industry forward. Regarding the medical side of FDA, where do you see the industry moving forward, and what are the most important things that FDA is doing to help safely and effectively guide it there? And on the food safety mission side, tell us the same thing about that mission area. And finally, is there an area of FDA's work that deserves a bigger spotlight moving forward?
I appreciate the question. I think that there are things in the 2020 budget, and I would come back to that I think can be sort of the foundational elements of a modern transformation of the agency. And I would point to what we're trying to do to try to develop knowledge management systems and more structured approaches to medical product review across the entire continuum, to make more of the application review process a structured, templated approach to review, where we're not receiving paper applications from industry anymore, but we're actually receiving information that's in a cloud-based environment, pulling that information down, and then populating basically templates and applications that are standardized from review to review to review, to help standardize a review, make it far more efficient, and having our team sort of collaborate around single applications that are in a virtual environment. What I've just described probably exists inside every corporation that deals with data and makes decisions based on information, but it's not the way FDA has traditionally done business because we haven't had the resources. So what the money that we're asking for to fully develop the new data enterprise is focused on that. It would fundamentally transform how we go about our work. Another transformational element is the ability to use information from electronic health records to do post-market safety assessments and also look at real-world evidence derived from EHRs as a component of how we assess not just safety in the post-market, but also benefit pre- and post-market. And so that's another transformational opportunity set for the agency, and those are embedded in our 2020 budget requests, and we receive partial funding in 2019. On the food side of our house, I think there's more work that we want to do to improve the recall process. We have a request in the budget for 26 FTEs in our Office of Regulatory Affairs, for example, to improve how we do recalls and how we get timely information to consumers. I think we need to continue to make investments there, but I think one of the more transformational things we can do from a technology standpoint in terms of modernizing the regulatory process is putting in place modern track and trace. What people want to know is they want to know, are they getting an assurance of safety from FDA? And that's where all the tools of preventative controls and FSMA come into play. They want to know if something goes wrong, will they find out about it quickly? And that's where everything we're trying to do to modernize the recall process comes into play. But they also want to know where their food's from, and they want us to be able to trace it right back to the source. And that's where modern track and trace comes into play. And as we've seen, when we have recalls, if we recall romaine lettuce, it takes us a long time to trace it back to the specific farm where it might have come from. We think there's much more we can do with traceability in the system using modern technology like blockchain. We hired as a Deputy Commissioner Frank Giannis, who's here today. He used to head up food safety for a very large retailer who has deep expertise in this, and he has many purposes in coming to FDA, but one of them is to try to stand up this modern framework. So we've requested resources for that as well. But I think these could be transformational elements. The final thing I'll just say, and I'll put a plug in for one more thing that's in the budget, if I may, with just 30 seconds, is what we want to do with the blood pathogen technology and basically pathogen reduction technology to improve the safety of our blood supply. I think this is another tool that could be transformative in improving the safety of the blood supply and lowering the costs, reducing the need to defer people who want to donate blood. And it's a technology that exists. It's a technology that we could be adopting, and I think it could be transformative on the blood side of our house. And if you ask me in closing where the biggest risks are, it's the places in the FDA portfolio where you have the potential for latent risks that could become widely distributed before they're fully made manifest, before we discover them. And those kinds of risks only exist in a few places in our portfolio, but one of them is in the blood supply, if there's some undetected pathogen in the blood supply, and another one is on the food supply of our house, food safety part of our house, where you could have a food constituent that gets widely distributed very quickly in today's supply chain, has latency associated with the pathogens, so that by the time people start showing up sick, it's been out there in the food supply for 5-6 days, and you could have a lot of people exposed.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Mrs. Fortenberry.
Dr. Gottlieb, I want to return to the issue of generic drugs that Mr. Pocan brought up. The last time you were here, I'd asked for the broad calculation. If the full vision that you have for generics was implemented, what would we say? Do you have that number yet?
I have.
It doesn't have to be absolutely precise, but let's move from the problem is let's move from the abstract to what is potentially real.
Well, I don't have the number yet, the aggregated number. What we do have is an updated, and we can make this available to you. We have an updated estimate of what the price reductions are as you get multiple product introductions in a category. And it's more substantial than what we've seen historically. We haven't been able to publish that yet, but we could certainly get that data to your office.
Okay, but you're leaving in 3 days.
Well, I will get it to you before we leave.
Are you staying?
Yes. We have it.
Okay.
We can get it to you today.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Harris.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just follow up on the CBD as a food supplement. So what would you need in order to establish regulatory action or actions against these stores that are selling CBD as a food, put it in food. I don't care what food they have. I mean, there's one that sells gummies, for God's sake, with the stuff in it. Talk about marketing to children. But my understanding is the Schedule 5, right? Pedialex is in the Schedule 5. Is that right?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah, so they obviously moved from 1 to 5, but codeine's in 5. So I assume that if I went into that display in that store and it said, buy these products with codeine in it, and they were food products, I would assume that the FDA has instant regulatory authority to, stop the sale of those. Does the FDA have authority to stop the sale right now of food products containing CBD?
We do, and we're taking action.
What action are you taking?
We've sent warning letters to a number of companies to ask them to remove products from the market. And when we send a warning letter, that's a legal action. And if the company doesn't comply, we could go to court and seek an injunction against the manufacturer. This has exploded, Congressman. And
I know.
And we are taking a risk-based approach. But with more resources, we can not only accelerate our policymaking process here to try to create a legal framework that will form the basis of more effective enforcement action, but also put more resources behind the enforcement activity.
Well, so you don't have the legal framework in place to enforce?
We have the legal framework in place to enforce right now. I think what Congress wants is a framework that could allow us to better differentiate between where this could be permissible and where it's clearly crossing the line. We're hearing a lot of different voices on this issue from a lot of different folks. Right now, they're all presumptively illegal, and we've been taking enforcement action based on risk. But what I think we'd ideally like to do, having heard from Congress very clearly on this, is try to create a framework that if there are places where CBD can be appropriately marketed as a food product and safely, perhaps in very low concentrations, whatever the scientific criteria might be, it would need to be a science-based process that ultimately defines what is permissible, have the framework to do that, and that would make it more efficient for us to then take enforcement action where risks are being created. I don't know I don't know the science on this. It could be at low levels. CBD might not pose a risk to consumers. And if that's the case, then we need to define what that is and where it could be marketed as a food product and not. Right now, we can't do that. To your point, everything's illegal. We could be taking enforcement action against all of it. And if I do that, that's the only thing that my agency will be doing right now.
Okay, but you can take action, and so you don't believe that you could, just by taking action against a few companies. I don't know. Are these the 3 letters in the statement? These are the 3 companies that got letters: Advanced Spine and Pain, NutriPure, and Pot Network Holdings.
And we also put out a statement yesterday about other concerns we had, including my statement about the concerns I had with respect to what some of the big box stores like CVS and Walgreens are attempting to do here, and we're going to be calling them up to have a discussion with them about it. I do think this is going to have a deterrent effect. So you don't see a lot of legitimate food packaging companies and large stores putting CBD products into their stores and into their food products right now because they know it's illegal. I think they're all trying to work with us to see what a legal pathway would look like, but they're not doing it right now. So I do think these steps are going to have a deterrent effect. So we have to see where we are in 6 months, because to your point, there's a lot of people out there. And
how about the flavored vaping products that are being marketed on online with CBD?
All of that causes concern to us.
Okay.
They're all a public health concern.
Okay. Just one very brief point. I noticed that what is the action you're taking on the flavored cigars? I mean, because my understanding is the usage is going down, but still, it may still be inappropriate, but the usage is going down. So how aggressive is the FDA going to go after flavored cigars?
Cigars are the largest growing segment of tobacco use among African American teens. So I don't know that it's going down overall, but it's certainly not going down in the segments where we have deep public health concerns. The guidance that we promulgated several weeks ago that will be finalized shortly would ban characterizing flavors in all non-grandfathered cigars. We also seek to advance a rulemaking process to ban characterizing flavors in the grandfathered cigars. We would need to do that through rulemaking, and we're committed. I don't believe any characterizing flavor should be in any combustible tobacco product.
Okay, but grandfathering is probably the way you'll go at first.
Well, we will seek to ban. Right. Ultimately, once our full policy framework is in place, there shouldn't be any characterizing flavor in any cigar.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Gottlieb, once again, I'd like to extend our appreciation for your work. During your tenure, you've been a wonderful advocate for public health, transparency, and you've been willing to take on some very, very tough issues. You certainly have my respect and that of my colleagues, as you've heard today. But before we close, I wanted to turn the floor over to you to share with us a little bit about your experiences and any lessons learned as the Commissioner of FDA that might be instructive for us.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'll share with you some of the advice that I imparted on my successor, Ned Sharpless, who I think very highly of, and I think is an outstanding public health official who's going to lead the agency very effectively. And this is a lesson I learned having worked at the agency before and worked with multiple commissioners. I think that as a sort of commissioner coming into this agency, you need to come in with a clear sense of what you want to accomplish from a broad standpoint when it comes to public health and advancing the public health mission of the agency. And I came in with a sense that we needed to be doing things a little bit differently and a little bit more when it came to the opioid crisis. I wanted to try to use the tools of the agency to try to address public health issues related to challenges with access to affordable drugs. There were other areas where I wanted to see if we can use the agency's tools in a more robust fashion to affect certain public health goals. But how we ultimately address those issues, the ideas, the policies, that came from the career leadership. It came from the center directors. It came from the professional staff. If you're going to make enduring policy inside FDA, that's the way you need to go about making policy. You need to have that engagement directly with the scientific and professional staff. And respect the policy-making process inside the agency. And so the very first thing I did was make sure that I meet every week with the center directors, and hardly a day goes by that I don't engage with them directly. Those relationships are among the most important relationships that I have in terms of my ability to effectively lead this agency, accomplish things on behalf of the agency and the public health of the country, and accomplish policy goals. So that's the advice that I left my successor. I know he took it to heart, and I know that's the way he's operated at the NCI, so I'm very confident that the agency is in good hands.
Thank you, Dr. Gottlieb, for being here today. We really appreciate your taking time to share your knowledge and your experience with us. I think it's safe to say that we've all appreciated working with you and your efforts at FDA, and we look forward to working with your successor. And of course, we wish you the best in your future endeavors. So again, thank you, and with that, the subcommittee is adjourned.
He doesn't have something to say right now.